Dear FinTech people, welcome back to another episode of The Future Of here at Nordic FinTech Magazine. We often bring you perspectives directly from the field as we speak to the visionaries and entrepreneurs that are reimagining financial services. But today, we have a slightly different angle and we're super excited to bring you a fantastic interview with Aleksi Grym, Head of Fintech and Principal Adviser at the Bank of Finland. As a central banker, Aleksi has a very interesting view of how fintech is developing in Finland and the driving factors that are contributing to the explosion of innovation we are seeing all over the Nordic region. Aleksi has also been personally involved in the assessment activities that the European Central Bank has taken to evaluate the possibility of having a central bank digital currency, also known as a digital euro. So if you're confused about what a CBDC is, what makes it different from the digital money sitting today in your bank account, and whether a European CBDC could replace cash or even those cryptocurrencies you've been playing with in your digital wallet, then you've got to listen to what Aleksi has to say. Aleksi, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. We really appreciate you carving time in your busy schedule to have a chat with us. So let's just start. Just please tell us who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Aleksi Grym. I'm head of fintech at the Bank of Finland. So that's the Central Bank of Finland, part of the euro system. So we have a small team in the bank which looks at fintech, mostly focusing on payment systems, developments in the markets. Both in banking, but maybe a bit more in payments and all the securities markets. So sort of fintech quite broadly. So there's 4 people in the team. I'm leading that team, and we've been doing this for about 5 years now. So engaging with fintech companies, but also doing our own research. And really trying to understand the industry, how the fintech industry is developing, and what sort of impact it could have on central banks. That's really my main job.
Well, that's it's just wonderful that we're able to have a central banker's perspective on what's happening. So I'm sure it's going to be quite an insightful conversation. So let's just start by I want to say that there's been an explosion of innovation in fintech, and that's across the Nordic countries. So in your perspective, what do you think is a driver behind this, specifically to the Nordics?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's two things that stand out, I think, in the Nordics. So there's a vibrant tech scene in general, I would say. There's already been for decades. Really, really great software companies and a sort of really nice atmosphere for tech-oriented new businesses, entrepreneurship. It's a really good environment to set up a new company. So that whole sort of entrepreneurship and tech scene has been there for a long time. And in addition to that, the Nordics actually also have a very strong financial sector. So very strong, old established banks. They're quite advanced in terms of digital transformation. We've had mobile banking and online banking for a long time. The identity infrastructure that's underpinning that is very strong. So it's a sort of very natural development that if you have a strong banking sector and you have a really nice tech scene, that these two come together and a lot of fintech companies come out of that.
Right. And for a number of years, we have seen varying central bank attitudes towards digitalization and disruption of the industry. I think in some cases we've seen that regulators became more stringent, seeking to sort of preserve the guardrails that enable the proper functioning and trust that is placed in the financial system. But also in other cases we saw that there was a more disruption-friendly attitude from central banks, where they were even willing to make certain provisions to the regulations to allow for more innovation within the system. Can you tell us what has been Finland's position and why?
Yeah, so I guess Finland's position is similar to many other European countries in this respect. It's finding the balance. The financial industry is one of those industries that is highly regulated, and it needs to be highly regulated because there are some inherent risks that need to be managed. So from a central bank and from a regulator point of view, it's about finding a balance of being sort of very market oriented. We do understand at the same time, I think most central banks acknowledge and are kind of endorsing market competition. So we want to have a competitive market. We know that that's where innovation comes from. That's where new consumer products are being developed. At the same time, it's an industry that requires a certain degree of regulation. So it's finding that kind of balance between those two. And I think Finland is very similar in kind of trying to find that balance where we create an environment that is conducive to good business, but at the same time let the business then kind of innovate on its own.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We've also seen a number of very fast-growing fintechs coming out of Finland. They come to mind Infuse and Alpha Sense. So what, in your opinion, has been the role of the Central Bank of Finland in enabling these type of companies to scale up in the way that they have?
Yeah, there have been some really nice fintech companies coming out. I mean, as a central bank, we don't want to take any credit of their success, to be honest. I think they've worked really hard to earn where they got to, and that's really great. So as I mentioned, for us, it's really about trying to create that environment, help with any sort of information and knowledge sharing that we can do, advising. So one thing that we've done, for example, with smaller companies is that they don't know the industry very well. They don't know who the players are, what the rules are, and kind of how to navigate in that whole industry. We just kind of explain it to them. We give them an overview of the financial industry and so what sort of things you need to keep in mind. But apart from that, it's really then up to the entrepreneurs and the companies themselves. And we keep engaging with companies all the time because we also want to learn from them. So I think knowledge sharing is probably the most important thing that we can do with startups.
Right. All right, let's shift gears a little bit, and now I'd like to talk about one of the projects that you've been involved in, which is the assessment of the digital euro. Yeah. Can you please tell us why do we need a digital euro, and how will it be different to the euros that we all carry in our pockets or in our digital wallets today?
So can I tell you why we need a digital euro?
Yep.
No, I can't tell you because we don't necessarily need a digital euro. I don't know if we actually need digital euro. So it's a really good question. But unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that. So it is interesting. So what the euro system is doing now is basically designing a digital euro, but we're not really saying we necessarily need it. But what we're doing is designing what would it look like in the euro area. So if we ever need it, then this is what it would look like. This is how we would do it. So, but of course it starts with some premises, with certain assumptions that it might be needed in the future. It's probably not needed today, but it might be needed in the future. And there's a few different scenarios where it could be that it's a good idea to introduce it. And in my mind, probably the most important one is resilience. Kind of having one alternative infrastructure, one alternative retail payment system, in addition to the ones that are already there. So it's useful in the sense of, if you think about cybersecurity and this kind of being as a sort of backup arrangement, that's maybe more from the regulator point of view. But then from the consumer point of view, it's also about just simply having the choice of one more alternative to making payments. And this also has to, of course, do with the fact that cash is being used less and less, especially in the Nordics, but also throughout Europe. We're still not quite there. I mean, cash is still pretty important as a payment instrument, but in the future it might be less important. So in that kind of situation, it's good to have many different ways to pay, also online. And then I guess the central bank wants to offer one more alternative, which would be in the hands of the public sector, essentially. I think that's really the thinking behind it.
Right, and I think when most people hear about this idea of a central bank digital currency, especially in the Nordics where a lot of the transactions are already digital, they probably think, well, Sure, but what's the difference with the ones and zeros that we use today? Could you perhaps clarify what would be different between what we have today and a potential central bank digital euro?
Well, if we look at from the consumer perspective, from the ordinary user, there might not be much difference, to be honest. So it would probably be some sort of mobile app. There might be a card that you can use at the point of sale, like when you go shopping or something. So from a sort of usability or from a practical point of view, there probably wouldn't be much difference. It would be just one more alternative, one more choice to have. So technically, it would utilize pretty much the same techniques and technologies that the payment solutions that are out there today would be using. The main difference would be that it would be a public sector provided solution. So you wouldn't have to, as a consumer, you wouldn't need to have anything, you wouldn't need to enter into a contractual relationship with a commercial provider of any kind. I think that's the main difference. And this might be preferable to some citizens. Maybe not everyone, but there might be citizens who think that they don't want to deal with any commercial entity, any commercial company. They just want to have a sort of public, the same solution provided by a public institution, by the state, essentially. So it would be that option to have.
Right, and so in the context of digital currencies, could you explain to us what would be the difference between a central bank digital currency or a central bank digital euro and the other cryptocurrencies that we see popping up all over the place? Yeah,
I don't see much in common actually with cryptocurrencies and CBDCs. So cryptocurrencies, I mean, they're growing. They are a business sector of its own, I think. But if you think about how are cryptocurrencies used, at least today, there's not much similarity with official currencies. So official currencies is what you use to make payments when you go shopping, or your salaries are paid using them, and so on, and prices are denoted in them. But cryptocurrency is more like a consumer product in my mind. It's something you buy. It's not what you buy with, if you think about it that way. So an official currency is what you use to buy other things with. But a cryptocurrency to me is a consumer product. It's something that has a market of its own. It's kind of like a hobby for people, but not really a payment instrument in itself. You could technically use it for that, but people just, I don't think they do it. I think they see it more as a sort of entertainment or consumer product in that sense.
Right. So based on that, then I guess it would be safe to say that in the future we're quite likely to have both types of digital currencies in operation. One that is state issued, and then these cryptocurrencies that people use either as an investment asset, or in some cases as a payment mechanism, but mostly as a hobby type of investment.
Yeah, I would say that's probably that's my guess, at least, is that it's a separate category in a way. We use the word cryptocurrency, but I think that's just the name for it. But if you look at it more closely, it's kind of a very separate category from any of the official currencies.
Right. Okay, so then I'd like to talk a little bit about the concerns around CBDCs, and presumably these are some of the ones that have already been brought into the discussion of a potential digital euro. We've heard that a CBDC could potentially replace the money distribution function that many commercial banks hold today. Would you say that those concerns are well-founded?
I think the concern is well-founded, yes, but it's not something that central banks want. It's not something that we would allow to happen. But it's a genuine question. So if that is something that could happen, then we should probably try to do the digital euro differently, or maybe not do it at all. So that's one of the risks that we want to avoid. So we really don't want to take any business from commercial banks. We don't want to change the structure of how the monetary system works. So if it looks like that could happen, then it's probably best to do it differently or not do it at all.
Right. And what would you say to skeptics that think that digitizing our economies through central bank digital currencies or digital currencies would be giving away the privacy that is so far been enabled through the use of cash?
Well, it is true that cash has some unique properties in the sense of privacy. For me, it's very difficult to see any digital solution or product having the same degree of privacy that cash has. With CBDC, I think many central banks are taking this question into account in the sense that CBDC could be a similar payment solution as other solutions, but it would maybe enable more privacy because that's what people are used to with cash. So they're thinking that if people are now used to using something that the central banks provide because it gives them privacy, then maybe we should also give them that opportunity with CBDC. I think technically that will be very difficult. So, whenever you put anything online, whenever anything is digitized, there's some sort of trail that is left behind. Data gets recorded somewhere. So I don't think we can ever get to the point where we have something as anonymous or as private in the digital world as we have with cash today. In that sense, I don't think cash is going away. I think it will have its position. It will maintain its role in that sense, because I think we can never achieve the same with any digital solution. And so in that sense, I think there's always be a place for cash also.
Right. So then potentially the future could be a mix of people that want the convenience of a digital currency could choose to use a digital euro for some transactions, but at the same time they could still choose to use cash for other transactions where they want the privacy that it enables.
Yeah, privacy or how easy it is to use. Something that we've also learned from surveys is that it's a really good learning tool. It's a good way to learn about financial services and sort of keeping your financials in order. So for for children, for example, it's much more intuitive to use cash. So it's a good way to kind of get started with the financial services, and then having many different options beyond that in the digital world. I think that's probably an ideal sort of spectrum of choices.
Right. And one of the things that at least has been written a lot about is how the potential use of CBDCs could enable financial inclusion. Could you explain to us a little bit more how a CBDC could potentially enable financial inclusion of unbanked individuals?
Yeah, so countries differ in this respect, and for some countries, CBDC, as you mentioned, could be a really good solution for improving financial inclusion. Of course, in the Nordics, everyone has a bank account. It's really easy to get financial services. So for us, that's maybe not the most important idea of CBDC, but in many other countries, a large part of the population don't have bank accounts and they don't have access to financial services or cheap or inexpensive banking services. So CBDC could be a sort of basic option, or a basic banking service or a basic payment service, which would be low cost and available, maybe easier available to a wider audience. So it could help with financial inclusion if it's designed that way, and I think it could be designed that way.
Okay, so then in our conversation so far, you mentioned a couple of times that it depends on the design features that the different central banks decide to put onto the CBDC. The question I have is that it's sometimes difficult not to compare any initiatives of CBDCs with the digital yuan, which is the first sort of central bank digital currency that has been put into, it has been injected into a large-scale economy. If there was to be a digital euro, would that differ significantly from the digital yuan?
Well, every CBDC would look a little bit different in every country or every region where where it's designed. Every CBDC is designed for that region, with that region in mind. So there probably would be some differences. That said, I think the environment and the situation in China is to some extent very similar to Europe, in the sense that there's quite good access to, for example, mobile networks, mobile phones. So we have the devices, we have quite a good digitized high-tech economy, at least in China, at least in the cities. And I guess there are also differences in Europe, but we sort of more or less are sort of quite highly digitized, and we have good access to devices, pretty good networks, mobile networks. So it's quite natural that maybe the solution would also look quite similar. And of course, in China, they've already used digital payments for a long time. And I think digital yuan is also, I guess, also the same idea is to have one more option instead of the two large payment solution providers in China. You would have a third option, which would be a state-provided option. So there are definitely similarities in thinking in Europe, between Europe and China in that sense. But then there are also small differences, and we don't have a design yet for the digital euros, but I'm sure there would be also some minor differences then in the end.
Right. I came across a paper that you wrote discussing the Avant smart card system that was created by the Bank of Finland in the 1990s. And you talk about it as a precursor to CBDCs. So my question is, what lessons can we draw from Finland's experience using the Avant card system?
Yeah, so that was an interesting case. So I don't remember the Avant card myself, but we had some archives. There was a lot of material at the Bank of Finland, because the Bank of Finland was the one that developed that product. And it was an e-money product. You could call it an e-money product. And in a way, it was a CBDC because it was developed by the central bank and it was issued by the central bank. So if it's an e-money product and it's issued by a central bank, then I guess that qualifies as a CBDC. And there definitely were some lessons to be learned, because it didn't become that successful. And of course, now we want to, it's natural to ask the question, why didn't it become successful? So there are a few different hypotheses for that. So one is that it was a sort of pre-funded e-money product. So you always had to kind of pre-fund the card. So you had to go, for example, to an ATM, withdraw money from your bank account and put it on the card, and then you could pay with that card.
Right.
And this kind of pre-funded model is a little bit cumbersome. It's a little bit awkward to use. And there are similar solutions on the market still today, where you have to kind of pre-fund an e-money account and then you can use that for payments. And it also raises the question, why would you go through that trouble of always pre-funding that account? There are things like auto top up and to make it a little bit easier. But I think we should keep that question in mind also now when we're designing CBDCs, is that, do people really want these kinds of pre-funded products? Or would it just make more sense to have a product that connects directly to your bank account? So that is one question to keep in mind. The other one is the questions about, for example, privacy. Also back then, privacy was considered a sort of strong point of the Avant card. It was considered a competitive advantage. That is, it gives you more privacy. You don't have to engage with any commercial entities. Kind of the similar discussion that we're having today. It turns out that it really wasn't that important to people. So in the end, people, I guess we're seeing that also with, to some extent today with all these different platforms and social media and so on. People are often vocal about privacy, but in the end, they don't necessarily care that much in the end, at least many people. I mean, not everyone really is ready to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to privacy. And it could turn out the same thing with CBDC. I think at least with the Avant, that aspect was never really that important. In the end, it becomes down to convenience, ease of use, and cost. I mean, those are really important drivers for what choices people make. And I think that's a good lesson to keep in mind.
Yeah, you're right. I think most of us we never really read the terms and conditions, and we're very quick to click accept whenever we want to join these platforms, and not really knowing what our data is going to be used for. And for most of us, the concern really is not there, as long as we're getting something in return. In this case, could be the service or the convenience that the platform or a digital currency could offer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, Aleksi, and then just one last question. Do you see any new opportunities arising in the financial sector, specifically for fintech, if there were to be a CBDC introduced into the European market?
Well, the CBDCs that are now being designed for in Europe, let's talk about the Digital Euro, but also some other projects. I think all of them have the idea that they would be quite open, and they would allow a lot of interaction with private companies, startups, and so on, fintech companies, to engage with that infrastructure. So to kind of add more services that utilize CBDCs in some way. So there would be probably some sort of APIs and so on, so that other applications can also connect to CBDC. And the kinds of services that might be relevant for that is that think about CBDC as a sort of very basic payment account that is available to every citizen. So you could all kinds of services that need sort of a very very basic payment mechanism. CBDCs could provide that service technically sort of quite easily, so that other services can connect to that. So that's maybe one thing. The other thing that's sometimes being discussed is using CBDCs for something like security trading, or kind of more in the wholesale market, maybe something like that. I'm not sure if that is the more. I think that is, to me, a bit more remote scenario, in the sense that it requires so much more regulation. It's a little bit more complex and difficult. So for me, the best opportunities probably come with the simpler use cases, and the one that are more retail payment related. So I think that there might be some opportunities on that side.
Right. Okay, well, Aleksi, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think it's great to hear this from someone who's directly involved in the assessment project for a potential digital euro. So really great hearing it directly from the horse's mouth. So we thank you for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
And of course, you're also going to be participating in the Nordic Fintech Week in September. So we look forward to seeing you there live in Copenhagen.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll see you there.
Thank you very much, Aleksi.
Thanks a lot.